God's protection. When we face life-threatening circumstances, we can be sure that God will deliver us, whether in life or in death. Here's Gene.
Martin Luther really loved this psalm. It was a tremendous encouragement to him because all of the challenges that he faced in his life, and I'm sure that while he was actually in a castle for protection, because the hierarchy of the church had given permission that if anyone saw Martin Luther, they had the right to kill him. And the reason that he was under this incredible persecution was because he actually pointed out to the religious community the abuses that were taking place relating to his 95 Theses that he nailed to the church door in Wittenberg, Germany. And because of that, he set forth a movement against these abuses, the people understanding these abuses, particularly abuses where people would pay money to take care of their sins and to commit sins in the future, to give them the right to commit sins. And basically, Martin Luther said, this is wrong. And so he ran for his life. He was in the Wartburg Castle. And this is an amazing story in itself because while he was in that castle, being protected from his enemies, he actually translated the New Testament into German in 11 weeks. Think of that. The whole New Testament he translated in 11 weeks. Now, later, there was refinement and help in relationship to that process, but it was during those times where he was experiencing what he felt was satanic attacks against him, discouragement, and it was then that he would go to this psalm. This was one of his favorite psalms. So, with that in mind, we have in Psalm 91, verses 1 and 2, a personal testimony. And one of the things you'll see in this psalm are the pronouns. Here in this opening statement, you see the pronouns I and my. The one who lives under the protection of the Most High dwells in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say to the Lord, my refuge and my fortress, my God, in whom I trust. And this is very similar to Psalm 46, which was the basis of the hymn that he wrote entitled, A Mighty Fortress is My God, a bulwark never failing. Very similar psalm here in Psalm 91. So this was a great blessing to Martin Luther and to many people throughout the years. It's one of those psalms that people turn to when they're facing difficulties, when they're facing stress. But as you know, as you move on in the psalm, you'll notice that you have a challenge to others, and here the pronoun changes. The pronoun changes from I and my to you. He himself will deliver you from the hunter's net, from the destructive plague, for he will give his angels orders concerning you to protect you in all your ways. And I want you to think about that little phrase, in all your ways. We'll come back to that. They will support you, referring to the angels, with their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. So we move from a personal testimony of your trust in God, that God is my refuge, and I can trust him, to the same thing applies to you. It applies to others. Now, as you move along in the psalm, it moves also now back to the personal pronoun, but this time it's God speaking. Here is a word from God. Because he is lovingly devoted to me, and there, that pronoun me refers to God. Because he's lovingly devoted to me, I will deliver him. I will exalt him because he knows my name. I will satisfy him with a long life and show him my salvation. Here God is saying through this word that if we honor him, he will indeed guide us and direct us. Now let's not make a mistake. The Bible never promises, particularly in the New Testament, that we're going to have long life because we're righteous. In the Old Testament, God did promise long life in a very special way for obedience to the children of Israel. But when you come to the New Testament, you never see a promise of long life reiterated. What you do is you see statements about God's grace. Now, as you take a look at what happened in the New Testament, did God give Stephen long life when he stood before the Sanhedrin? As a relatively young man, he was stoned. And by the way, Saul, who later became Paul, was the one who approved of his martyrdom. What about John the Baptist, who was beheaded, probably as a relatively young man, at least in terms of today? What about James, the brother of John? John lived to be in his 90s. James, as a relatively young man after the church, the brother, the son of Zebedee, was beheaded by Herod. So you see, in God's scheme of things, these men were certainly godly men. They were men of righteousness in their lives. And yet in his sovereignty, some died, others lived. John, I think, never really fully grasped that in his own emotions when he wrote 1 John and penned, this is how we know what God's love is. If we really serve him, if we're willing to lay down our lives for others. This is a true test of the love of God. And as he probably wrote those words, he thought about his brother James, who died years before, maybe 50 or 60 years before. And perhaps with tears in his cheeks, he says, this is how we know what love is, being willing to lay down our lives for others. So God is not promising here long life, but what he is promising is deliverance. And Paul spoke to this. It's a beautiful statement. Let me repeat the principle, and then I want to share this passage from Paul. When we face life-threatening circumstances, we can be sure that God will deliver us, whether in life or in death. And that's a statement really from Paul's hand, from his own pen when he was in prison. Look what he wrote to the Philippians. This was his first imprisonment. I call this his expectation, his hope. Yes, and I will rejoice because I know this will lead to my deliverance. What kind of deliverance? Well, I think he explains that. Deliverance through your prayers and help from the Spirit of Jesus Christ. My eager expectation and hope. Right here while I'm in prison, while I'm chained to this Roman guard, I don't know what's going to happen. But my eager expectation and hope is that I will not be ashamed about anything. And here's the answer to the question of deliverance. But that now, as always, with all boldness, Christ will be highly honored in my body, whether by life or by death. For me, living is Christ, dying is gain. What is the deliverance? Well, Paul said, I will be delivered. I'll either be delivered from this prison to come back and serve you and to teach you and to continue my ministry. But I may die. But if I die, I'll be delivered. And there he is saying to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. As Moses said in the psalm earlier that we looked at, I'll fly away. I will be home with my Father in my home in heaven. So here we have a powerful principle, deliverance. Deliverance for ministry, he's saying, or deliverance into God's presence. Now, here's a very interesting thing that I want you to think about in terms of this reflection and response question. When Satan used Psalm 91 verses 11 and 12, to tempt Jesus in the wilderness, why did he omit all your ways? Now notice, here is the psalmist's statement. Let me repeat it. For he will give his angels orders concerning you to protect you in all your ways. See, earlier I said pay particular attention to that. You, to protect you in all your ways. They will support you with their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. Now here's something very interesting. When Jesus was tempted in the wilderness and Satan came to him, Satan quoted this. And he quoted it as God's word, which means that this psalmist was writing the words of God, what God wanted him to write. He was the author, humanly speaking, but he was guided by the Spirit of God, and even Satan recognized that. But notice, when you compare Satan's words with this psalm, Satan deliberately left out a phrase. Notice what Satan said to Jesus. He will give his angels orders concerning you, and they will support you. He left out in all your ways. And he did that deliberately. He did it deliberately. One of the great commentators on the Psalms is James Montgomery Boyce. He's now with Jesus, but Boyce actually wrote 3 volumes on the Psalms. And I've used those books a lot in my own biblical research. But he addressed this issue of why Satan left that out. And he said this: the devil wanted Jesus to test God by jumping off a pinnacle of the temple, trusting his Father to send angels to bear him up so he would not be dashed to pieces when he fell, and thus impress the people. Jesus replied, rightly saying, it is also written, do not test the Lord your God. And here's what Boyce says. Testing God by jumping off a pinnacle of the temple would not be going in the way that God had given him to go. Satan knew that, so he just left it out. Sly old Satan. It would be the very opposite of trusting God. He would not be trusting God. Just the opposite. And so the point being here is that Satan wants us to be deceived, to walk out of the will of God, to rationalize. And I would just like to conclude these thoughts with something in Proverbs. In fact, these have become very special life verses for me. And I recommend these verses to people as life verses. I wrote these verses in my Bible shortly after, my first Bible I ever owned, shortly after I became a believer. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not rely on your own understanding. Think about him in all your ways. That's a powerful phrase, isn't it? Satan doesn't want us to think that way. He didn't want Jesus to think that way. He left it out. In quoting the Bible, quoting God, he purposely left it out to try to get Jesus to walk out of the will of God. But here, this proverb says, think about him, God, in all your ways, and he will guide you on the right paths. Isn't that an incredible promise? So here's the principle to live by that grows out of this psalm. When we face life-threatening circumstances, we can be sure that God will deliver us, whether in life or in death.